Hello, everybody. This is the October roster that the men's national team has put together to face Cuba and Canada. This roster was put together by our head coach, Greg Berhalter. It couldn't have been put together by anybody else. This is the most stagnated and complacent I felt about the men's national team under Greg Berhalter. I wasn't even expecting the likes of Richie Ledesma or Uli Linus, guys that aren't playing senior club soccer right now, but have, immense talent to be on this roster. I was just expecting, Anthony Robinson over a guy like Daniel Lovitz, or Dwayne Holmes over a guy like Christian Roldan or Corey Baird, or Paxton Pomykal to be back on the roster, or Miles Robinson to be back on the roster. Guys that, either A, have been playing really good at the club level, Ventura Alvarado, another center back, or that have played for the national team and have looked at the very least, competent. It's just that we continually bring in these players that aren't helping us now, like Corey Baird and Will Trapp and Daniel Lovitz, and aren't going to help us in the future. I mean, these guys, if we're playing these guys in World Cup qualifying, I'm gonna be frank, I think we're in trouble. And I say that knowing that Daniel Lovitz has had good moments, and same with Trapp and Baird. I don't want to pick on too many of the other guys. I think the other guys are fairly good players, but those are guys that, should be replaced by now. We're nearly 10 months into Greg Berhalter's tenure, and we're still dealing with the likes of players like this when we should be transitioning to Christian Pulisic and Weston McKennie and Zach Steffen and Aaron Lawn taking the reins of this team. I say that, I don't think this is a bad roster. I'm just saying that this is a roster against two teams, especially Cuba, that are not up to a very high caliber of standard. They're games that are competitive. They're games that in turn then would captize certain players. But this is these are the opponents that you're going to be playing up through January camp. The next time we're going to be able to see a full strength men's national team roster is going to be in March, following this window in October and the following window in November, playing the same teams. It's just frustrating that Greg is not, truly expanding the player pool. He's really sticking to these guys, his guys that right now aren't cutting it, and in the future, I wholeheartedly believe this, knowing that they're professional soccer players, that, good for them. They're very talented enough to be doing what they do, just not on the international scene. Goalkeeping, it's fine. Zach Steffen has been really good at Dusseldorf. Sean Johnson's been in form with NYCFC. Same with Brad Guzan. Center backs, I mentioned Ventura Alvarado and Miles Robinson not being here. I'm not all too off-put by the center back picks, especially with John Brooks being injured as well. Tim Ream played really well against Uruguay. Aaron Lawn's got a little bit to prove. I think him and Matt Miazga are going to be in a competition for that right center back spot. Zimmerman, I think, would have been the guy to drop of the center backs, but, it is what it is for right now. You want a positive of this roster. Nick Lima moved from right back to what he's been playing at the club level, left back. If you want a big negative, Serginho Dest, who has not accepted a Dutch senior call-up, who hasn't accepted a Dutch youth team call-up as of now, as of making this video around 15, 20 minutes after this roster was released. That's something that we're going to have to keep an eye on. I made an entire video about pitching him for the men's national team. I didn't expect him to accept this call-up, the call-up that I'm assuming Greg Berhalter made. But then why, we're just going to have to rely on Daniel Lovitz now? I mean, we have, Anthony Robinson is playing in the championship. He's played well in the championship, but we're still relying on Daniel Lovitz, a role player for a team that didn't make the Eastern Conference playoff picture. I don't know what to say about that. Right back, we have Reggie Cannon, who's played well for us. We have DeAndre Yedlin back. I think that's a positive as well. He just got on for Newcastle as a substitute just this past week. Apparently, Berhalter, same thing with Matt Miazga. Apparently, Berhalter sees both those guys as fit enough to come play for the men's national team. I'm happy that Yedlin's back. I think this role, this kind of right back role, is really going to suit him. So him and Cannon, I think, are going to have a real nice competition. Holding midfield, we have Michael Bradley back. I don't have too many qualms about that. We just have to, Greg has to understand Bradley's, his capabilities and what he brings to the table as a player, but also his deficiencies, and help him defensively. We have Jackson Ewell. Jackson Ewell's brought back in, playing in that really kind of high motor system in San Jose. He's been playing. I think his play has leveled off a little bit for the club level, but he had a really nice showing for us against Uruguay. I hope that we see him play over a guy like Will Trapp, who has kind of become the face of the entire Greg Berhalter roster call up. His deficiencies as a manager in terms of picking a roster. It's not that I don't think Will Trapp is a competent professional in terms of MLS play. He's just not an international player. He doesn't have the steel to do it. His passing isn't as good as Bradley or Ewell. The best that we've seen of Will Trapp is when he's playing side by side with Michael Bradley, and that limits our offensive output drastically. I don't know. People want to talk about Jazzy Zardes not deserving of call ups, Corey Baird not deserving of call ups. Will Trapp, at least for me, is the face of all that. We go now to our 8s and 10s. Christian Pulisic listed amongst the midfielders. I think that is a mistake, and I mentioned that if we're leaving off a guy like Dwayne Holmes and Paxton Pomacall, or even a speculative call up for Richie Ledesma, in favor of bringing in a guy like Corey Baird so we can move Chris back to the midfield, I think that's, I don't know, it's not dumb, but it's misguided on Berhalter's part, because we could play something like Weston McKennie and Sebastian Lletget, who I'm actually very excited to see on this roster again. He's been playing really well for LA Galaxy, and then have Chris on one side and Paul Arriola or Jordan Morris on the other. That would work a lot better in my eyes. Having Chris and Wes play together, Wes has kind of taken on. He's been playing more in the midfield under David Wagner at Schalke, kind of playing as like a right center mid. He hasn't been as dangerous on the ball as we've seen him for the international scene, but he hasn't had to move around like he did under Tedesco last year. That I think he's going to feel a little more comfortable in the midfield. I guess we'll see with Pulisic in terms of, can he stay in that midfield? Is he going to get beat up in that midfield? Canada's going to offer a good test. They're going to be able to put out Marc-Anthony Kaye, Jonathan Osorio, Will Johnson, Samuel Piet. It's going to be interesting to see how Pulisic holds up to that. Christian Roldan, I think, is the borderline guy in terms of a guy that isn't deserving of making an international call-up, but does enough at the club level and just enough at the international level that I think he still warrants call-ups, especially his club performance. I think, watching him more and more as Seattle's been making their playoff push towards the top of the Western Conference table, I've grown to like a lot more of Christian's game, and if he can continue that play into the international window, I think we have a player that offers some value to us. I don't know if I would call him up over Dwayne Holmes. I don't know if I'd call him up over Paxton Pomacall, but I'm not unglad that he's here. I think he's very slightly worthy of this call-up. And another guy who I think is worthy of a call-up is Brennan Aronson. I follow the Philadelphia Union. I was really kind of interested that this was even being thought of by Greg Berhalter, and now to see it actually happen is really kind of I think it's a good thing. Brennan's very good on ball. He glides on the ball. He's got a really good defensive work rate, which again should help if he's playing next to a guy like Weston with Chris in front of him. But I don't know if we're going to see that. This entire position group is very strong right now. It's just a matter of finding a pairing that's going to be able to work not only offensively but defensively as well, especially in front of guys like Michael Bradley, Trapp, and Ewell that aren't necessarily the best in terms of defending. No Alfredo Morales either. He's been injured. I think he would have been a nice addition to this roster. I'm not all too worried about the attacking midfielders. I am worried about the winners a little. Paul Arriola, Tyler Boyd, Jordan Morris, Corey Baird. Morris has been the most impressive of these guys in MLS. I'm actually kind of glad that he's here. I think he's going to continue to work himself into a fairly vital piece of this team, at least until Tim Weah or, looking down the line, Uli Linez or Gio Reyna can kind of come up through the ranks and really take that spot. Baird is a guy that it's confusing why he's here. He's had a decent club form for RSL. He scored a goal just last week. He's just a guy that I think we're going to have to start stomaching, that Greg Berhalter likes enough to keep putting him on this roster. I don't think he gets as much shtick as Trapp or Lavitz or Jazzy, because he did have a period of time where he was taken off of the team but then brought back on following Gold Cup. he's not a negative player, but he's definitely just a net neutral player in terms of our system. Paul Arriola, he's going to continue to do what he does. He's probably the best combination player that we've seen so far with Christian Pulisic. That's a positive. Tyler Boyd, I think this is a really big window for him because as of right now, the way that I look at it, if Tim Weah gets healthy again, I think Boyd is the first guy on the chopping block in terms of winners, and maybe deservedly so. He hasn't been very good for us on the international games. He hasn't been playing well for Besiktas in Turkey, and Besiktas in Turkey haven't been playing well at all. They're one of the bigger teams in Turkey. This is a position group that needs maybe not an overhaul, but just a picturing of what can be done in that position group, and that's why a guy like Anthony Robinson was kind of playing up at left wing, and DeAndre Yedlin, last time we saw him under Greg Berhalter, is playing up as a winger. That's a position group that I think this is going to be a nice window to see what they can do. Same thing with the striker group. Josie Altidore coming back after missing the September friendlies due to club play. Josh Sargent is here. He's had a decent run of form for Werder Bremen. He's been really tight in terms of his tactical play and his technical play, in terms of touching balls into good areas for his teammates. And then we also got Jazzy Zardes. We talked enough about Jazzy Zardes throughout the entirety of the U.S. men's national team collective discussion that I don't think it warrants to be talked about anymore. Overall thoughts. No Serginho is a big kind of letdown. I don't know if it's a letdown as much as we were all kind of preparing for it, but we were hoping that we might see it again. That would cap lock him into the men's national team. We wouldn't have to worry about the Dutch coming vulturing one of our very good young players. There wasn't a ton of buzz around Pamukal or Robinson, or the Miles Robinson coming back into this camp, so I'm not as disappointed about that. I think, if you want to look for positives, we're not bringing in Omar Gonzalez. That's a positive. Negatives, Christian Pulisic being listed with the midfielders. He's had struggling moments there before in this system. Maybe that changes with this window. Again, it's a window that we should be able to really dominate against Cuba and have, it's our first road game. It's our first game outside of the U.S. against Canada. It's going to be our biggest test up until, at the very least, March, which, with the Hex starting in next September, that's kind of concerning that we might be wasting 5-ish months with our last very competitive game being played with guys part of this roster. Because as of right now, these guys, I don't know how they would do in the Hex. I think this is a good enough team just based on the likes of Chris, who really hasn't been playing for Chelsea, but is still uber talented. Weston McKennie, when Tyler Adams comes back healthy, haven't really mentioned him. When Tyler Adams comes back healthy, this should be a completely different team. When John Brooks comes back healthy, it's a roster that is still plagued by injuries, that we can't see a really electric roster. And so for that reason, I thought we would see more of an experimental roster. And I think that's the biggest letdown part of all that, is it isn't very experimental. It's very sticking to what Berhalter knows. It's, working on this system of playing out the back. And there's, even Jurgen Klinsmann, there's been snippets and interviews with him talking about how, that's kind of a fool's gold kind of perspective that Greg Berhalter's chasing. I guess we'll see. Against especially Canada, maybe not so much Cuba. There's things to work on with this roster. I don't think a lot of people are going to be happy with this roster. I'd be lying if I would say that I'm ecstatic with this roster. I'm willing to see what continually bringing these guys back into the fold is going to look like on the field. I'm hopeful that we play some really good soccer in the coming week, or I guess it's the October, like the October teens range. Slightly optimistic, but I'm just not very content with this roster at all. I'm hoping Greg Berhalter proves me wrong. This is Zane Price signing out. Have a great day.